The rain was falling in sheets that afternoon, the kind of rain that makes you question every life decision that led you to be outside in it. I was standing at a bus stop in downtown Seattle, soaking wet, designer clothes clinging to me like a second skin. My expensive haircut now looking like something a toddler might have attempted. I'd just gotten fired from the most prestigious law firm in the city. Honestly, the rain felt appropriate. It felt like the universe was crying along with me, mourning the death of my carefully constructed life. My name is Ethan, and I'm an Omega in a world that's determined to convince me that means I'm worth less than everyone else. The thing about being an Omega is that it comes with a lot of expectations. Society expects you to be soft, nurturing, content, to stay home and raise children, while alphas go out and conquer the world. I'd spent my entire life rebelling against those expectations. I'd gone to law school, graduated top of my class, and clawed my way into one of the most competitive law firms in the country. I'd worked 80-hour weeks. I'd sacrificed relationships and friendships and any semblance of a normal life, all in the service of proving that an Omega could be just as successful as anyone else. And I'd actually done it. I'd made partner track. I'd handled important cases. I'd earned the respect of my colleagues. Or at least, I'd thought I had. Then Marcus Ashford walked into the conference room. He was a new partner at the firm, an alpha from old money, the kind of man who exuded power without even trying. He was stunning in that way that makes people stop and stare. Tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see straight through you. But more importantly, he was also completely, utterly insufferable. From day one, he was condescending toward me, questioning my legal strategies, suggesting that my emotional nature made me unsuitable for complex litigation. He'd make comments in front of clients about how impressive it was that I could keep up with the real lawyers, or how I must be so relieved to be working with actual alphas who could handle the heavy lifting. I complained to HR twice. Both times, they told me that Marcus was too important to the firm to have any action taken against him. That I should probably try to get along better. That maybe I was being too sensitive. So I tried to ignore him. I buried myself in my work. I told myself that if I just produced results, none of the rest of it would matter. For 6 months I proved I could do the job better than almost anyone else in the firm. And then, inexplicably, I was called into the managing partner's office and told that they were letting me go due to budget constraints. There were no budget constraints. We'd just signed a massive new client, but Marcus was there, sitting in the corner of the office like he owned it, and I understood immediately what had happened. He'd convinced them to fire me. That's how I ended up at the bus stop in the rain, soaking wet and utterly devastated. The bus pulled up, and I climbed aboard, the other passengers instinctively pulling away from me. Omegas always got that reaction. People didn't know quite what to do with us, so they defaulted to treating us like we were slightly less real than they were. I found a seat and stared out the window, watching the city pass by and wondering how I was supposed to rebuild my life after having it systematically destroyed. My apartment was a disaster of empty takeout containers and depression when I got home. I'd been living alone for 3 years, having learned that relationships were complicated when you were an Omega trying to establish yourself in a career. Most alphas wanted you to be submissive or grateful or willing to sacrifice your ambitions for theirs. I wasn't willing to do any of those things, so I'd remained single, telling myself that I was better off that way, that relationships were a distraction I couldn't afford. Now, as I stood in my empty apartment, I wondered if I had been lying to myself. My mother called that evening, somehow sensing that something was wrong. Mothers have a way of knowing these things. She'd been telling me for years that I worked too hard, that I needed to find balance in my life, that my obsession with proving myself wasn't healthy. I didn't tell her immediately about the firing. Instead, I let her talk about her day, the garden club meeting, the new recipe she tried, the way my father had been making her laugh. My parents had one of those rare marriages that actually worked. My father was an alpha, my mother was an omega, and they'd somehow managed to build a partnership that didn't involve either of them surrendering their identity. They gave me hope that maybe, somewhere out there, something like that could exist for me too. But when my mother asked how work was going, I broke. The whole story came pouring out. Marcus, the comments, the gaslighting, the firing. My mother listened quietly, and when I finished, she said something I didn't expect. Maybe this is the universe telling you something. Maybe you need to stop running from who you are and start running toward what you actually want. What I want is to be taken seriously, I said bitterly. What I want is to not be judged for what I am. What I want is to live in a world where being an omega doesn't automatically put a ceiling on your ambitions. Those are all fair wants, my mother said. But sweetheart, you can't change the world's prejudices by working yourself to death. You can only change your own life. And right now your life needs some changing. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and thought about what she'd said. She was right. I'd been so focused on proving everyone wrong that I'd lost sight of what I actually wanted. Did I want to be a lawyer? I'd thought I did. But lately, I'd been dreading work. The cases that used to excite me felt hollow. The victories felt empty. Maybe I'd been chasing someone else's version of success instead of my own. The next morning, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when my laptop pinged with an email. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, Mercer and Associates. The subject line said, "Interested in discussing a position?" I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But something made me open it instead. The email was from a woman named Victoria Mercer, and she explained that she'd heard about my situation through mutual connections. She was starting her own firm, a small practice focused on cases that traditional law firms wouldn't touch, cases involving discrimination, labor violations, cases that helped regular people stand up against the systems designed to oppress them. She said she'd been impressed by my work on the few public cases I'd handled. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in talking about joining her firm as a founding partner. I read the email 3 times, convinced I was misunderstanding something. A founding partner, not an associate, not someone trying to prove myself. An actual partner from the very beginning. I called Victoria that day, and we talked for an hour. She was an omega too, though she'd taken a different path than I had. She'd spent 10 years working in nonprofit organizations. Before deciding that she wanted to try something different, she understood the struggles of being an omega in the legal profession. And she was creating something specifically designed to change that dynamic. I don't want to hire people based on what they are, she explained. I want to hire people based on what they can do and what they're passionate about. That's going to be the foundation of this firm: equal partnership, equal respect, no hierarchies based on secondary gender, no assumption that omegas should be content with less. Just good people doing good work. I accepted the position that day. It felt impulsive and probably foolish, but it also felt right in a way that nothing had felt in a very long time. I spent the next month settling my legal affairs, breaking my lease, and preparing to start this new chapter. The firm was going to be small. Just Victoria, myself, and 2 other junior associates who were passionate about social justice. We were going to operate on a shoestring budget. We wouldn't make much money. We'd probably struggle to get clients at first, but when I walked into the office on my first day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Pure, uncomplicated excitement about the work ahead. Victoria showed me around. It was a modest space with old furniture and worn carpet, but it had potential. We spent the day setting up, and as I hung the diplomas on my office wall, I realized something important. I'd been so focused on being taken seriously that I'd forgotten to take myself seriously. I'd been so busy proving my worth to everyone else that I'd never actually believed in my own worth. That's when the door opened, and my entire world tilted on its axis. Standing in the doorway was an alpha I'd never seen before, and he was, quite simply, the most beautiful man I'd ever laid eyes on. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to be looking at something far more interesting than he was actually seeing. He was dressed impeccably in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He was looking at Victoria like she'd just offered him the keys to the kingdom. "I'm here for my meeting," he said, his voice a low rumble that did complicated things to my omega biology. "Perfect," Victoria said, gesturing him inside. "Ethan, this is Cameron Sterling. Cameron, this is Ethan Hayes, partner." Cameron's eyes shifted from Victoria to me, and I watched his expression change. It's hard to explain what happened in that moment. It was like the entire world compressed into the space between us. His pupils dilated slightly, his scent shifted, became richer, more complex. And I realized, with a certainty that went beyond rational thought, that he could smell the attraction on me just as clearly as I could smell the surprise on him. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said formally, extending his hand. I shook it, trying to ignore the electricity that shot through my arm at the contact. "You as well." What I didn't know, as Cameron sat down across from me and began explaining why he'd come to see us, was that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. I didn't know that this alpha, this stranger who'd just walked into our office, was going to completely disrupt everything I'd spent my entire life building. I didn't know that the universe, which had seemed so determined to crush me just days ago, was actually setting me up for something extraordinary. All I knew was that when Cameron Sterling looked at me, something in my chest shifted, suddenly terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Cameron's case was complicated, the kind of case that most law firms would have immediately turned down. He was a member of the Sterling family, one of the oldest and wealthiest families in the country. But he was also an alpha who'd come out as gay, and his family had essentially cut him off, freezing his trust fund, kicking him out of the family business, treating him like he'd betrayed some fundamental code of honor. He'd come to us because he wanted to fight back. He wanted to take legal action against his family for breach of contract regarding the trust, and he wanted to do it in a way that would be a very public statement about the prejudice and discrimination within his own family's structure. Victoria and I spent hours going over the documents he brought in, and the more I read, the more outraged I became. This was exactly the kind of case that I'd wanted to work on when I went to law school. This was a case about fighting injustice, about standing up for someone who'd been wronged by the systems designed to protect the powerful. And it was a case I could actually win. But every time I looked up from the documents, Cameron was looking at me. Not in a creepy way. It was more like he was trying to solve a puzzle, and I was the key piece. It made me intensely uncomfortable and intensely aware of every aspect of my appearance. The way my hair fell, the way I was sitting, whether my clothes fit right. I hated it. I'd spent my entire career avoiding being seen as an object, and here I was, hyper-aware of how I was being perceived by an alpha I barely knew. When Cameron finally left our office, Victoria waited approximately 30 seconds before raising her eyebrows at me. "So," she said. That happened. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, looking back at the documents with more intensity than they actually required. You felt it, too, the spark, the connection. The whole room shifted when he walked in. He's a client, I said firmly, and a complicated one. We need to maintain professional boundaries. Of course we do, Victoria said, but she was smiling in a way that suggested she wasn't taking my professional boundaries very seriously. Over the next few weeks, Cameron became a regular fixture in our office. He'd come in for meetings, ostensibly to discuss his case, but he'd always managed to find reasons to talk to me specifically. He'd ask for my thoughts on legal strategy. He'd ask my opinion on documents. He'd bring coffee, and somehow always remember that I drank it with oat milk and 1 sugar. Small gestures that meant nothing and everything at the same time. I found myself looking forward to his visits in a way that was deeply problematic. I'd catch myself checking my reflection in the mirror before he was due to arrive. I'd wear the clothes that I thought made me look most confident, most powerful, least like society's idea of what an omega should be. I was, quite literally, doing exactly what I'd spent my whole career refusing to do, presenting myself in a way designed to impress an alpha. One evening, about a month into working on his case, Cameron stayed after a meeting. While Victoria had already left, we were alone in the office, and the air between us felt charged with something I couldn't quite name. How are you holding up? He asked me. This case must be bringing up a lot of difficult emotions. I'm fine, I said, perhaps a bit too quickly. This is the kind of case I wanted to work on. Why would it bother me? Cameron leaned back in his chair, studying me. Because you're an omega, and I'm an alpha, and we live in a society that's built on the assumption that there's a fundamental power imbalance between us, and you've spent your entire career fighting against the idea that that imbalance is real or acceptable. So working on a case where I'm the victim of familial discrimination probably feels complicated. I was stunned by the accuracy of his observation. How did you? Your mother, he said. I had my investigator look into your background when Victoria told me she was hiring you. I know about your career at the prestigious law firm. I know about what happened with Marcus Ashford. I know about all the ways you've been fighting against people's preconceptions about what an omega can do. I should have been angry about the invasion of privacy. Instead, I found myself asking, why would you do that? Cameron stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Because when I walked into this office and met you, something happened that I wasn't expecting. And I wanted to understand what it was. I wanted to understand you. I'm not very complicated, I said. I'm just an omega who wants to be taken seriously. No, Cameron said, turning back to face me. You're not just an omega. You're an extraordinary person who happens to be an omega. And the world has been trying to convince you that those two things are mutually exclusive. But they're not. I stood up because I needed to move, needed to do something with the energy that was coursing through my body. Cameron, I can't. I mean, there's a professional boundary here that we probably shouldn't be crossing. I know, he said, and I respect that. I wouldn't have brought this up if I didn't think it was important. But I need you to know that I see you. I see your strength, your intelligence, your passion, and I'm asking if you might be willing to let me get to know you better outside of the context of this case. You're a client, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Not for much longer, Cameron replied. We'll have this case settled in another month or so. After that, I'm just a guy who wants to take you to dinner and find out if the spark I feel when you're in the room is mutual or if I'm imagining things. I wanted to say no. I wanted to maintain my professional standards and my carefully constructed walls. But instead, I found myself saying, after the case is settled, if you still feel the same way then, we can talk about it. Cameron smiled, and it transformed his entire face. I'm going to feel the same way, but I'll wait. True to his word, he did wait. And we worked on his case, and it was one of the best pieces of litigation I'd ever done. We deposed family members. We found evidence of discrimination. We proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Sterling family had violated the terms of the trust agreement based solely on Cameron's sexual orientation. By the time we went to trial, it was clear we were going to win. The settlement came through on a Tuesday afternoon. The Sterling family, desperate to avoid a public trial that would completely humiliate them, agreed to restore Cameron's trust and pay damages for the breach. It was a complete victory, the kind of victory that made me feel like maybe I'd made the right choice, leaving the prestigious law firm. This was the work I was meant to do. This was the kind of law that actually changed lives. When Cameron got the news, he immediately came to the office. He pulled me into a hug, lifting me slightly off the ground, his excitement so genuine that I couldn't help but laugh. When he put me down, his hands lingered on my waist. Thank you, he said, for believing in me, for fighting for me, for being exactly who you are. You're welcome, I said softly. So, Cameron said, my case is settled. That means I'm no longer a client. That's what it means, I agreed. Does that mean I can ask you to dinner now? I should have hesitated. I should have thought about this carefully, considered the complications, worried about what it might mean. Instead, I found myself smiling. Yes, I said, that means you can ask me to dinner. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Capitol Hill, the kind of place that was intimate without being pretentious. Cameron was waiting for me when I arrived, and he'd brought flowers. Not roses, which would have been expected, but white tulips, which were apparently his favorite flower, and he wanted to share that with me. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. It suggested that he was thinking of me as someone worth impressing, worth being genuine with. The conversation flowed easily, which surprised me. I'd expected awkwardness given the professional history, but instead, we talked like we'd known each other for years. Cameron asked me real questions about my dreams and my fears, and he actually listened to the answers. He didn't try to fix me or suggest that I should want different things. He just accepted who I was and seemed to genuinely enjoy that person. Can I ask you something? I said as we were finishing dessert. Why me? You could date anyone. You're wealthy, intelligent, attractive. You could have literally anyone you wanted. Cameron set down his fork and looked at me seriously. I could have anyone who wants me for my money, or my family name, or the superficial things they can get from knowing me. But I couldn't have someone like you, someone who's actually accomplished things, someone who's fought hard for everything they have, someone who sees me as a person, not as a resource. That's rare, Ethan. That's extraordinary. I'm just a lawyer, I said. No, Cameron said, reaching across the table to take my hand. You're a person who refused to be limited by what society said you should be. You're a person who fought for your dreams even when everyone told you it's possible. It was impossible. You're a person who sees injustice and actually does something about it. That's not just. That's everything. We started spending all our time together after that. I'd go to his apartment in the evening, and we'd cook dinner and talk until late into the night, or he'd meet me after work and we'd take walks through the city, just existing together in comfortable silence. It felt good in a way that surprised me. I'd convinced myself for so long that relationships were complications I couldn't afford. But with Cameron, the relationship felt like it was adding to my life rather than detracting from it. About 3 months into dating, I met his family. Not the Sterling family. That was complicated and would take time. But his mother and siblings who had supported him even when his father hadn't. His mother was warm and immediately accepting, and his siblings treated me with genuine kindness. It was clear that they were happy to see Cameron happy, and they seemed to appreciate who I was, beyond the context of my relationship with him. I like him, his mother told me, when we were alone in the kitchen. He's good for you, isn't he? He looks at you like you hung the moon. I like him too, I admitted. I'm still getting used to the idea that I could have someone in my life who doesn't require me to sacrifice who I am. That's the thing about real love, his mother said. It should make you more yourself, not less. If someone is asking you to be smaller, or less ambitious, or more submissive, that's not love. That's control, dressed up as affection. Cameron proposed about a year into dating. He did it in the office, in front of Victoria and the entire team, which was typically Cameron. Big, public, impossible to ignore. He got down on one knee and asked me to marry him, and I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. It felt inevitable, like the universe had been moving us toward this moment since the day we met. The wedding was small and beautiful, just family and close friends. Cameron's father didn't come, which stung a little, but Cameron had accepted that his father wasn't ready to support him fully. The important people were there, his mother, his siblings, Victoria, all the people who loved him and accepted him for who he was. On our wedding night, as we lay together in our hotel room, Cameron said something that made me cry. "I'm so grateful," he whispered. "Grateful that you didn't immediately dismiss me when we met. Grateful that you saw me as a person first. Grateful that you decided to take a chance on us." "I'm grateful too," I said, "for everything you've given me. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For showing me that I could have both a career and a relationship. For making me feel like being an omega wasn't something to overcome, but just part of who I am." Cameron pulled me closer, and we fell asleep like that, entwined together, no longer separate, but something combined. The next few years of our life were some of the best I'd ever experienced. The law firm thrived. We won case after case, and our reputation grew. We started getting clients from all over, people who had been wronged by systems designed to protect the powerful. Cameron eventually decided to go back to school to get his MBA, wanting to understand business law so he could help people navigate corporate discrimination. He was brilliant at it, and by the time he finished, he was considering starting his own business consulting firm. "I think I want to help businesses understand how discrimination harms them," he explained to me. "Not from a moral standpoint, though that matters, but from a practical standpoint. Diverse companies perform better. Inclusive companies retain talent better. Equitable companies are more profitable. If I can help people understand that, maybe I can create real change." I supported him completely, which meant that we were both building careers while also building a life together. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when we were both working too hard, when we'd see each other only in passing. But we made a conscious effort to check in with each other, to talk about our days, to make sure that we were still investing in each other and not just accepting each other's presence. A few years in, Cameron's father had a heart attack. Cameron was devastated, not because they'd been close, but because they'd never gotten the chance to reconcile. He spent a lot of time at the hospital, and I was there with him every step of the way. When his father recovered, he seemed to have a change of perspective. He called Cameron and asked to meet. Cameron was terrified going into that meeting, but he came out of it changed. His father apologized, genuinely, for not supporting him when he came out. He said that he'd had to do some real work to understand his own prejudices and where they came from. He couldn't offer to turn back time, but he could offer to be present going forward. It wasn't everything Cameron wanted, but it was something. And sometimes, something is enough. By the time Cameron and I had been married for 5 years, we had built something truly remarkable together. We had a home that was filled with love and laughter. We had careers that we were passionate about. We had a relationship that was based on genuine partnership and mutual respect. We had a life that I never thought was possible for an Omega in this world. One evening, we were sitting on our porch looking out at the city. The same way we did most evenings when we had time. Cameron took my hand and said, "Do you remember when I walked into your office that first day?" I said. "I knew immediately." He continued, "Something about you just felt right. Like you were someone I was supposed to meet. Like the universe had been setting up this moment for me." "That's very romantic," I said, smiling. "It's the truth," Cameron replied. "You changed my life, Ethan. You made me believe that I could have both authenticity and love. That I could be myself and still be worthy of someone amazing." "You did the same for me," I said softly. "You showed me that I could be ambitious and still be loved. That being an Omega didn't mean I had to choose between my career and my heart." We sat there in comfortable silence, and I realized that this was what I'd been searching for my entire life. Not success or recognition or any of the things I'd thought I wanted. This person, this partnership, this life. It had taken losing everything to realize that what I'd really been running from was the possibility of being truly seen and loved by another person. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. It took an alpha, a member of the very class of people I'd been fighting against, to show me that some of my assumptions were wrong, that not all alphas were the enemy, that some of them were partners, truly equal in every way, that some of them could look at an Omega and see not weakness or need, but strength and capability and worth. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I leaned my head on Cameron's shoulder and felt a sense of peace that I'd never felt before. The world was still filled with prejudice and discrimination. There was still work to be done. But here, in this moment, with this person, everything was exactly as it should be.